is my pleasure to introduce Professor Joël Merquet from Paris, from university. You are always changing the name of the university. So it is called now Université Paris Sud, or
University. Still University Paris Sud, and it will become University Paris-Saclay the 1st January.
I see. 1st of January, Université Paris-Saclay. So Professor Merquet is a pure mathematician from from distinguished mathematics department, and he was like a bit reluctant to speak to physicists because so I asked him to teach us something very, very simple, and we will see what will be.
So it is an honor for me to be invited here in this prestigious Center for Theoretical Physics. And I try to make something like a colloquium talk, which is very elementary. So people who already master well the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, I hope I apologize. So you take a triangle in the plane by Euclid's theorem. The sum of the angles is equal to pi. And according to Michael Spivak, Gauss-Bonnet is the star theorem. The 5th volume of differential geometry of Spivak is devoted only to Gauss-Bonnet theorem, and it is considered as an achievement. I will state the general Gauss-Bonnet theorem for surfaces, and progressively I will explain all the concepts behind. So I take a surface with 4 holes and a region D inside this surface, which is as drawn in the figure. And I assume that the boundary of this domain D consists of a finite number L of curves C1, CL. In the figure, there is just one curve connected. Then 2 pi times the Euler characteristic chi of D is equal to 3 terms. A double integral over D of the Gaussian curvature Kg that I will introduce times dA, which is the infinitesimal area element, plus the sum over the curve CL of the simple integral of the geodesic curvature Kg that I will introduce, plus the sum of external angles around the angular points of the curves. This is a general statement, so it is a bit hard if we don't play with it recently, but I will make it progressive very soon and very, very elementary. So this is the description of the objects I said orally already, and I copy again the statement of the theorem. It is well known to be a deep link between topology on the left-hand side and differential geometry on the right-hand side. Let us verify whether this theorem agrees with Euclid. The Euler characteristic of a triangle, I will play with it in a while. It has 3 vertices, 3 edges, and 1 face. So it is 3 minus 3 plus 1, which is equal to 1 in this case. What are the external angles for a triangle? It is not the internal angle, it is the external angle in green. So it is P minus the internal angle, isn't it? So, and of course, on a plane, on a table, the curvature vanishes. And also, because this is straight curves, the geodesic curvature vanishes too. So when I come back to the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, this is 0, and on the left, on the right, sorry, I only have 3 terms. So 2 pi times 1, which is the Euler characteristic, is it equal to 0 plus P minus A plus P minus B plus P minus C? Yes. This matches with Euclid elementary theorem. Next, I would like to state what is considered to be the main interesting Gauss-Bonnet, which is a bit more elementary. Instead of taking a region D, which might be complicated in a complicated surface, I take the region D to be equal to the surface itself. So D equal S. And in this case, there is no boundary curve, no external angle. It remains only the Euler characteristic of the surface itself is equal to 1 over 2 pi times the double integral of the Gaussian curvature K like Gauss times dA. So this is what, for instance, Allendorfer and Weil, Fenchel, and also Hope in the 30s and the 40s generalized to higher dimensions, but I will not much speak about this except a bit at the end. So I would like to make a very elementary talk to understand Gauss-Bonnet in a plane. To understand what is a surface, present the local Gauss-Bonnet theorem, which is the most important theorem, and I will deduce, thank you, and I will deduce the Theorema egregum in a way which is not the way books present it itself, and then I will deduce the global Gauss-Bonnet theorem. Before, I would like to speak a bit about the Euler characteristic. So I take a region. Maybe it is not necessarily a triangle. It is a curved region. And I will put 3 points, 3 edges. Then the Euler characteristic is the same as a triangle, because it is, of course, obvious that in the figures, all figures are homeomorphic, can be continuously deformed one into the other. So once again, with these figures as shown, I obtain the Euler characteristic equal to 1, like for the triangle. Let me try with a little more complicated example, with a hole. So I put a triangulation, I count, and I find 0. And the theorem is that whatever you put a triangulation, I will define it carefully in a while, you will find the same number. For instance, with 2 holes, I put this triangulation, I count, and I find -1 now. I put 3 holes, and then I leave you as an exercise for the end of the talk. When you have L-1 holes and L curves, so there is a big curve around everything, then the Euler characteristic is 2 minus L. What is a triangulation? It is a decomposition of a domain or even the whole surface as somehow curved triangles. But it is topological in principle, so the curves can be just continuous. In Riemannian geometry, you could even take geodesics, which would be a bit more simple. So I take a basic triangle, and every piece is homomorphic to this triangle, and I require that something, this is forbidden, for instance, this is forbidden, and this is allowed. Okay, this is elementary to understand what I mean, so I don't formulate it. What is a surface? So for people who are mathematicians or who are really doing this, I apologize. A surface is an object for mathematicians, which is, it looks very complicated, but the figure tells it's not. Okay, so it's a union of what we call charts, which means little pieces, which I call omega alpha, on the surface. I have many views on the city, on the Earth, but of course, there are some overlaps. So this means that these things which are in the abstract object S, I have a way to represent this piece in a plane, in something like in a map, so that I can read with some map, key alpha, which is a homeomorphism, which is continuous, and with inverse, which is also continuous. And the requirement is that when there is some overlap, then on the right-hand side, the map from the gray regions should not be only continuous, it should be smooth if the surface is smooth, analytic if the surface is analytic, etc. This is the abstract definition of and here, because I'm speaking about a topological manifold, I require only these are homeomorphisms of open sets in R2. Okay? What is now, as I said before at the beginning, so I have something which is a region with boundary. What is a surface with boundary then? It's the same definition. The only difference is that I take in the plane a half plane, which is the upper half plane, Poincaré half plane, where y is at least 0. An open set can be inside the open half plane, or they can touch the boundary. So the boundary is just the real axis. And for the formulation of a surface with boundary, I require that if the omega alpha touch the boundary, on the right-hand side, I will have homeomorphisms, which will be also homeomorphisms of the segment on the boundary included. So I modify the definition to have the concept. So by definition, so this is somehow simplified definition, but the figure tells everything. So we don't need to read, in fact. So a topological surface with boundary is a collection of omega alpha with this compatibility condition on the boundary. Theorem of Rado. Very difficult to prove, but I just wrote in one line. Every topological surface with boundary even is triangulable. This is a non-trivial theorem. It's something, even when I teach Master 2, I cannot somehow put it in my lectures. And it's rather dry, so it's just to struggle. I just show you how you struggle a bit to prove this. So I come back to what I wanted to say. I'm saying that mathematically, you can always have this thing. But to have a complete proof is 20, 30 pages of really boring details. So it's not to say that you should not do mathematics at all. One little trouble comes, so I try to survey a bit the proof, just a bit. So remind that I have some open set, but because the maps are continuous, the boundary, green boundary, can be very wide. That's the problem, because this is not smooth boundary, so it can be a fractal boundary. This is the problem. And then there could be some intersection between some open set you start with, which are very bad like this, even worse than that. So you have to deal with this if you really do the triangulation theorem. And even as stated in a non-compact case, just countable at infinity. So it is the most general, which is the most difficult, in fact. And then I illustrate with a figure an element of the proof. When we have this kind of curves here, which have bad behavior with respect to another curve, and you have to modify the curves close to a point, so there are a lot of tricks to avoid complexity. So I don't enter the details. This is another aspect of the proof. So here is a very wild curve, and you decide, because when you join a point R1 to Q1, this is very wild, and then to avoid wildness, you follow the curve, even if it is very wide. So I'm finishing about triangulation. Next, as I said, we speak about Euler characteristic. So it's again a non-trivial theorem to prove for any triangle. So we know there are triangulations now. We admit. Now we can make this little count, number of edges, number of vertices, number of faces, subtract. And the theorem is that it does not depend on the triangulation. Good. Again, I don't prove the theorem. This is a part of the proof. So, okay. I just illustrate some triangulation. For instance, this is a triangle. So a triangle is triangulated by itself, so it's good. But if you triangulate differently, you will find the same number. This is what the theorem says. Theorem. Two abstract compact orientable surfaces without boundary are homeomorphic. They can be mapped to each other by a continuous map, which is inverse is continuous, if and only if they have the same Euler characteristic. Again, this is a non-trivial theorem, so I don't enter the proof. And if you have boundaries, you have the same theorem, except that you have to require, so a surface with boundary is, in a simple case, like a cylinder. So it has two circles of boundary, so you have to require that they have the same number of circles as boundary, and also the same Euler characteristic. Once again, I don't prove this theorem. So these were the topological preliminaries, and now I come back to Gauss-Bonnet, because I wanted to explain a bit the left-hand side of Gauss-Bonnet, remember? It was the left-hand side here, key of D. I somehow explained it a bit, but not with proofs, because proofs is more difficult and time-consuming. And now I want to explain Gauss-Bonnet in a very simple case. I am working on the plane, like on this table. It's very flat. So there is no curvature. This is Gaussian curvature, which I did not define yet. But we will see that it is 0 in the case of a plane. This is what we expect. But the geodesic curvature, you remember the middle term, is not necessarily non-zero. It amounts to the curvature of the curve in the plane. This is what I will redefine. So what it is? I will deal with some very simple domain D, which is essentially a disk, or something which is equivalent to a disk. Maybe there is a mistake, it should be D2 here, I'm sorry. And I will also deal a bit with the Jordan curve theorem, which is also a topological preliminary. It states the following. If you take a curve on the plane, like on this blackboard, which will never cross itself until it comes back to the initial point, then the theorem of Jordan tells you that the boundary, so I take a region, I start here, so I take the connected component, like some oil, and the first part of Jordan's theorem tells you that the closure of this connected component contains all the curve, not part. And also for another component, it contains all the curve. So this is statement 1. The boundary of every connected component D of the complement R2 minus C is equal to the whole curve C, of the whole curve boundary of D. Sorry. And this is what is mostly known. The complement has exactly two connected components, the interior and the exterior. And this theorem is again non-trivial to prove when the curve is only continuous, but when it is smooth, it is more easy to prove. And I will survey the proof in the case where the curve is smooth, because we, for Gauss-Bonnet, have a smooth curve. Because we want to have curvature, so we need to have a smooth curve to speak about this. So I review rapidly the proof. My curve here on the plane is diffeomorphic to the circle by a smooth map, gamma, with inverse, which is also smooth. I can make a tubular neighborhood of the circle, extend the map little gamma as a map big gamma, which makes a tubular neighborhood of my curve in the plane, which I denote by tube C. Okay? This tube C decomposes in two components, like a strip cut in two parts. And if you enter this part, you can go around the curve everywhere. If you enter this part, you can go around the curve everywhere. So what I said is sufficient to say that the complement has at most two connected components. I repeat, the fact that you have decomposed the curve in two strips suffices to show that the complement of the curve has at most two components. But it can be one. And the key difficulty is to show that it is not one. Because on a torus, it is one. Here is a curve, here are the two strips, and the complement is connected. So I draw some local geometry along the curve. these two neighborhoods. And these figures is a counterexample to a book in French who I used, which is entirely devoted to the Jordan curve theorem, and where there is an error in the proof in the differentiable case. So in this book, it is done by a topologist. There are 3 proofs of the Jordan curve theorem in the case where the curve is smooth, is continuous and fractal, something the most difficult case. And then near the end of the book, he says, oh, come on, I can do it for smooth curve in 2 pages. And then there is an argument which tells you that you took a point here, Q star, which is in the same distance of these boundaries. And this is a contradiction which is not. Because on a torus, there is no contradiction. So he did not use the topology of the plane, so he made a mistake. And I corrected the mistake.
Contradiction with respect to what? Please remind me. Contradiction.
I am not precise. I'm sorry. So his reasoning is false. I don't remember all the details. But at some point he says this situation is impossible, but it does not really use the topology of the plane. And it is possible on a torus. So his argument is definitely wrong, I'm sure. And I corrected the argument, and I show rapidly, but there are 3 good proofs in the continuous case anyway. So it's just because the reputation is that it's a smooth case, it is easier. So I also assume as him, but I don't want to enter too much in the details, so I will be quick. There is a point which is an equal distance from these 2 boundaries here. And for orientation reasons, it is these figures, this figure. And then the curve should be connected, because the curve is a circle topologically. So it should be connected, so it should join. But look, because of orientation, the orientation is opposite. So what the curve can do? Can it be joined in here? No, it's opposite in orientation. So it could be something like this. Ah, come on, it would intersect itself. So on the torus, this can be true, but here on the plane it is not. Okay? And what I do now, I take this as the origin, and I make inversion, which means that I take 1 over z. Z maps to 1 over z, so this region, so not yet here, so first before I just deform it a bit to touch the core of the curve. So these are the 2 pieces of the curve with this orientation. And then I make an inversion. So this means that the pink region becomes outside. And then I have these 2 pieces of curve here. And apparently they cannot join like this. Even if they join like this, they would intersect, we believe. Yes, because there is, topologically, if I come back to the figure here this is black, here this is red. So you have four like in a topologically, it is just a rectangle. And then the 2 curves I was dealing with, they are doing something like this. They go from this point to this point, and from this point to this point. And then there is a well-known theorem in topology, which is the diagonal theorem, which tells you that if you are doing 2 continuous curves like this, they must intersect, which is a contradiction as the author of the book wanted. So this is finished for Jordan curve theorem, almost, because I want to say just a bit of words about the complexity in the continuous case. I can take the counter set. So I don't intermatch this. And with the counter set, make a curve which is like this. Repeat the process infinitely many times. And if I want to have a Jordan curve, I can start with this, make an arc of circle to come back here. So this is a Jordan curve, which means that it is a closed curve without self-intersections, as in the blackboard. And with the complexity which I can put in each step, for instance, I could even put another complexity, whatever I like. One can show, it is known since the 30s, that you can make a curve which is simple closed on a plane whose 2-dimensional measure is strictly positive. And even worse, even worse. You can suppose that you put your curve in some square. You start from a point here, so you can cook up a continuous Jordan curve without self-intersection, coming back to its original point, such that the measure of the curve, the two-dimensional measure of the curve, is 1 minus epsilon, where this is a square of length 1. So this means that you can almost completely fill the square to epsilon in two-dimensional measure, and still it is a Jordan curve. So is the Jordan theorem true? Yes.
Is it like self-similar curve which requires to go with such an iteration?
Yeah, exactly.
Like Cantor said, yes?
Exactly.
Go to infinity.
Yeah, so if you have a fractal type of
Exactly.
curve, then the length is infinite and then this does not apply, or?
This applies here, exactly. And there are some refinements, because here, on this part of the curves, it is not fractal. So we can make, in fact, that the Hausdorff measure of the curve is equal to the Hausdorff dimension of the curve is equal to 2 at each point of the curve, which is not in this example. You can refine this. Still, the Jordan theorem is true. So now, because I'm not working at all on fractal analysis, I'm more a differential geometer like Pavel Nurovsky, I come back to smooth curves. So I forget about this Jordan, because I said that for smooth curves it is okay. And I try to explain a bit about curvature. So theorem. For every domain in the plane which is now diffeomorphic, not homomorphic to the disk, and the boundary is a simple closed curve diffeomorphic to a circle, then the integral of the curvature along the curve is equal to 2 pi. And it is an instance of Gauss-Bonnet because the Euler characteristic is 1. There is no Gaussian curvature and no external angle. So what is curvature? And I want to say that we will see in a while that Gauss-Bonnet just tells you that the integral of phi prime is equal to phi. So Gauss-Bonnet is a triviality. I will insist on that. Why is it a triviality? By a figure, of course. Look, I am a very simple ellipse like this, and I take the normals. And the curvature, by definition, is the quotient of the green left. So look, I took unit normal vectors, and I transported them to the unit circle. So this is the green that I divide by the green here. I take the limit, this is a curvature. So it's very elementary. So what? When you integrate curvature, this means that this piece of curve becomes this piece of curve. So you immediately see that when you make the full turn, you make 2 pi. So Gauss-Bonnet is a triviality. So I repeat, Gauss-Bonnet just tells you this in the case of a curve. I will nevertheless play a bit with Gauss-Bonnet because this is the goal today. So here, G is an open interval which is shrinking around the point gamma of S. So I take the quotient and I take the limit as G tends to 0, and I call it the curvature. There is another view on curvature. First of all, physically it is obvious that I can have a point which is along the curve to speed 1 unit of speed, and this is parametrization by arc length.
Who defined curvature as you defined this previous one?
So it is the same as Gauss curvature for surface.
Gauss defined Gauss curvature.
Yeah. So it was done by Euler before, even by other people. Okay. I will, in fact, not use the two-dimensional, because there is a two-dimensional definition which is analogous, which I like a lot, but today I will not speak about it. I will only present Gauss-Bonnet with a different view. We will see. So this means that my curve can be of length 1, which means that this is gamma dot. And then I take the normal unitary vector, which is a rotation of the tangent vector. And G is ds, an infinitesimal segment. So gamma of G is gamma of ds, which is gamma dot of ds. And then, because the speed is 1, the length of gamma of ds is ds. Sure. So I repeat the figures. This is the parametrization space. This is gamma of ds, and there is a d angle of s. And in summary, curvature times ds is equal to curvature times the length of ds. And by definition of curvature, which is the quotient of these two things, this is the length of n of gamma of ds, which is by definition of the angle, d angle of s. So curvature is just the variation of angle on the curve. If the curve is very, very, very curved, the variation of angle will be quick. If the curve is almost straight, the variation of angle will be not quick. That's all. Another way to understand curvature is to have a horizontal direction and to count angles with respect to these horizontal directions. It gives you the same. So I denote by theta of s the angle of gamma dot of s with respect to some given direction delta. And then the curvature is d theta over ds, again the variation of angle. And then I repeat that the Gauss-Bonnet theorem is a triviality. Why? It just tells you this. The integral of d theta over ds is theta t minus theta of 0, t, so the curve is of length t. Okay, so it's 2 pi. Here is another picture when the domain is not convex. So I'm looking at the variation of angle along the curve, but there are some places where it goes backward. So this is represented in the circle as something as this curve like this, but this cancels. So in any case, it is 2 pi. So what we have understood is that it depends on the topology of the domain, because now I have topologically a disk. So I have 1 times 2p, because the Euler characteristic is 1. Yet another, before I come to a bit more complicated topological situations, I also say that so theta of s is the angle between the tangential vector and a horizontal direction. And I can, because this is of length 1, I can write it as exponential e theta of s, where theta is real. Then gamma second is d theta over ds, which is k of s times the internal normal vector, which is minus the one I defined before, but we don't really care about orientation. And so the theorem, the prototype Gauss-Bonnet theorem, tells you that if you have a domain which is topologically a disk, with boundary which is topologically a circle, if you parameterize it by arc length, as I said, then the acceleration of the curve is something times the normal vector, and this is the curvature, and then the integral of the curvature is equal to 2 pi times 1. Okay, that's all. This is very elementary. So we understood it now, we want to understand it with holes now. So I'm now taking a domain with some holes, as in the figure. So this means that like I have a certain number of curves, C1, CL, with holes. Here L is equal to 3, so there are 3 curves. So C1 is a big curve, C2 is one internal curve, and C3 is one internal curve. Theorem. Under this hypothesis, 2 minus L is equal to the sum of the integral of the curvature on each CL, which is integral from 0 to T1. T1 is the length of C1, plus the integral from 0 to TL, the curvature of CL ds. And then immediately we realize that 2 minus L, so maybe I forgot, yes, no, I forgot nothing. So what, maybe I forgot something, 2 pi, I'm sorry, maybe I forgot a 2 pi. Yeah. 2 pi is missing, I'm sorry. So, so we are now solving the exercise I gave. 2 minus L is key of D. Or just realizing that this is coherent. In the case L equals 3, we have to be careful because the orientation of the curve counts. This is trigonometrical orientation, this is clockwise. So there should be a minus sign. And here I did not miss the 2 pi. So it is integral 2 pi for C1, the big curve, and minus 2 pi for the other curve, which is 2 minus 3, which is 2 minus L for L equals 3. And I leave as an exercise that the consequence of the Jordan theorem tells you that if you have many curves in the boundary, there is one big curve which is surrounding the others, like in the picture. So this is impossible. This picture is impossible if the domain is connected. Only this picture is possible. And therefore, this is here the proposition. The boundary of a domain is a certain number of curves. Then there is one curve whose interior, in the sense of Jordan, contains all the other curves. And then we conclude. I repeat the same computation. So in the general case, because I've done it for the case L equals 3, now I'm doing it for the case L arbitrary. So the sum, again, a 2 pi is missing. No, maybe not here. So integral of k on C1, which is plus 2 pi by the preceding theorem. And here it's minus 2 pi, so it's 2 minus L, which is what we wanted. Okay, so I said I will be very, very elementary. What about exterior angles? Now we add a bit of complexity.
This is easy for a physicist and angle.
Yeah, exactly. So just a jump.
Small thing.
Yes, of course. So here, when you look at variation of angles, there is some jump here, which is just variation of angle. So it is the same. There is no difficulty.
This is a delta-like curvature.
Exactly. The curvature has a Dirac masses at each point. So we get, by this observation, by Stilge integral, if you like, you get that when the curve, the domain is bounded by a finite number of connected curves, diffeomorphic to a circle, homeomorphic to a circle, with angles, then there are correction terms to the preceding formula. But on the left-hand side, the Euler characteristic 2 pi times the Euler characteristic is the same. It has not changed. So there are correction terms. And once again, it is a triviality, because even if maybe it's integral on CL, so you use a Stilge integral, and you have the total variation of angles. This is nothing. Okay. So after these trivialities, we continue for something which is also not difficult. Now we are wanting to do something for surfaces, not just for flat surfaces. This is what I said at the beginning. And I will take surfaces in R3, like this, embedded here, with some map from an open set of R2, which I denote by delta, to a domain D on my surface, which is x, y, z of u and v. So it's a map, uv maps x of uv, y of uv, z of uv. So we can forget about this paragraph, and what I start with is to differentiate this map big M, bold M here, with respect to u and with respect to v, which is abbreviated as this. And these are tangent vectors to the surface. Remind that when we have two vectors A and B, we can take the scalar product, the norm, and therefore the norm square of mu and mv are these. And also, so let us draw what's happening. I have a point u and v, infinitesimal vectors here, du and dv. This is du dv. And then, by transfer, this infinitesimal vector becomes an infinitesimal vector at the point m of uv on the surface, which is dm, it's xu du plus xv dv, yu du plus yv dv, zu dv plus zv dv, okay? And therefore, the norm square of dm is the square of what I said, and I reorganize, and I found xu square plus yu square plus z square times du 2 times this times du dv plus this times dv square. And I use the same notation as Gauss, E, F, and G to denote these coefficients. And they are smooth functions, or analytic if you prefer, of u and v. So this is to say that for a small vector on the surface, the norm square of this green vector is given by this expression here. The norm square of this vector is given by this expression. I also need the concept of vector product between two vectors, A and B. So I remind that if I take A and B, there is a parallelogram in the plane they generate, which is the area AB, and then I define A wedge B to be area AB, oriented area, times n, which is the orthogonal vector. In the figure, it's a bit false, I'm sorry. But if A and B are collinear, I put it equal to 0. So using this definition, it is elementary to show that A wedge B is equal to this expression with terms of these 2 by 2 determinants. And what matters most in the original memoir of Gauss, which I studied very precisely, but I did not present something about this today. In the Gauss memoir, the normal to the surface plays a key role. And now the normal to the surface is the wedge product of the two tangential vectors divided by their norm, because it should be of norm 1, and it is this ugly expression. But I want to do Gauss-Bonnet, so it's just the starting point. So I'm taking a domain which is diffeomorphic to a disk on my surface, like in the picture. 5 minutes only? It's 50. It's 45. So I will be very quick then. So I should not have been too elementary in the beginning. So here is the domain, so I will just jump. I will not define Gaussian curvature. I will define what is the geodesic curvature first. So I have tangential vectors and acceleration vectors, but because I am in 3-dimensional space, I thought I had 1 hour, I'm sorry.
Yes, you do have 50 minutes, which is 1 hour. Go on.
And we started not in time, so I spent something like less than 45 minutes until now. So
yes, it's okay, go, avanti.
So here, it's gamma dot. This is gamma acceleration, which is outside the surface, so I project on the surface, and I obtain what I will denote as a geodesic curvature. So the geodesic curvature, it will be here, the projection of the acceleration vector is a multiple of the normal vector times the tangent vector, and this is what I call the geodesic curvature. So you can show that it is an invariant concept, which I do not in the slide. So now we want to imitate what we've done on the plane with Gauss on the plane. So remind that we have that gamma second is curvature times the normal, which is d theta ds. So we integrate this formula. So we integrate ks ds, which is integral of d theta over ds, which is this. We want to do the same with the geodesic curvature I just defined. The problem is that there is no, on the surface, there is no auxiliary circle to move the normals. This is not existing. Also, what I could do, because there is no auxiliary circle on the surface, I could have horizontal directions and measure the variation of angle to define the curvature. But this does not work because there is no invariant direction. If I change coordinates, there is no reason that there is one line of field in green I chose was the right one, so it may be changing. But I have some line fields, which is this vector field mu and mv. So I just take mu, and I can measure variation of angle with respect to mu over mu norm. The problem is that it is not invariant, but I can define it anyway. So theta s is the angle between this direction and gamma dot. Then I'm coming back to the metric on the surface, where the E, F, G are also written this way. And now I introduce a Deus ex machina. I tell you that take this function P and Q, which are expressed in terms of E, F, and G on the curve, because S is a parameter on the curve. Take these two functions, restrict them to the curve, P of U de S, V of S. And the main proposition is the following. Along a curve drawn on a surface, the geodesic curvature looks like this. So there is the variation of angle I defined, and there are some correction terms. Exercise to prove this. It is in the book of Ducarmo, of course. But now I am happy, very happy, because now I have an expression of the geodesic curvature in terms of coordinates. I repeat that the angle is not invariant, because if I take a diffeomorphism from uv to u bar, v bar coordinates, in general the angle will be different. However, I said that the curvature is invariant. I said it. It is proved. I did not prove it, but it is proved. So the correction terms are necessary. And then what? Come back to what we wanted to do. We wanted to integrate d theta over ds in the case of the plane. So we are trying to do the same now. We integrate the geodesic curvature. So once again, we integrate d theta over ds, which is good because it will give 2 pi. This is easy. But we have to integrate the correction terms. And for this tool, there is a tool which is the Riemann-Green theorem, which tells you that integral of p du plus q dv is a double integral of minus pv plus qu. And for people who don't teach this, I taught this year, we can do this is on a domain, a model domain which is between two curves, and here is a hint of the proof. So we don't read, because I want to present to the end, Gauss-Bonnet anyway. So here we don't read this, and now we continue the computation with the Green-Riemann theorem. This simple integral becomes a double integral of minus dp over dv, dq over du, and by miracle, this is the right thing. This is the Gaussian curvature. And if you plug in these expressions of P and Q I gave before, here, after some work, you obtain this expression which was obtained by Gauss after 15 years of research. So Gauss waited 15 years until he republished something on surfaces because he wanted to have an expression of the curvature which corresponded to what he believed to be true, that the curvature expresses in terms of the ds2. And it is a very difficult elimination computation. On the side of Élie Cartan, it becomes clearer. I could have presented this, but I did not. So this is the Gaussian curvature, which occurs in the Riemann-Green theorem. And then we can also write it as kgdA with this determinant of the metric coming up. And therefore, by this little integration we done, we obtain the Gauss-Bonnet theorem, which is a local one. Which is a local one on a small domain on the surface. We have this for every domain diffeomorphic to a disk. If the topology is more complex, as we did on the plane, you can play with all the boundary curves. If there are some angles, you can add the angles at the boundary. And now I finish in 2 minutes by saying that the Gaussian curvature is invariant under changes of coordinates. First, the area element can be shown to be invariant under changes of coordinates, because now the ds2 becomes a ds2 bar, which is this. The area elements are easily shown to be invariant. And I admit, I don't prove it, that the geodesic curvature is invariant. I said it, but I formulate it. So this means that it corresponds pointwise. Okay? And magically, once you have this, when you have Gauss-Bonnet plus geodesic curvature invariant, you deduce that the Gaussian curvature is invariant easily, as follows. So theorem, if you have two metrics which exchange by the diffeomorphism, then you have the integral of kg on d is equal to the integral on d bar of kg bar. And moreover, punctually, the Gaussian curvature correspond to each other, and the proof is very easy. We have Gauss-Bonnet on the left, Gauss-Bonnet on the right, equality of geodesic curvature, and therefore there is equality of integral of Gaussian curvature. And we pass to the limit when the region shrinks to 0 to get equality of the Gaussian curvature punctually. I have to anyway finish in 1 minute to present how you deduce the global Gauss-Bonnet theorem from the local one. Because you triangulate the surface, so let us state a basic theorem on a compact surface without boundary. 2 pi times k of S is the integral of kgdA. Proof, you triangulate the surface, as I said. You apply Gauss-Bonnet theorem on each triangle because I showed that Gauss-Bonnet theorem is true for each local domain. I make the sum. So this is Gauss-Bonnet on each with the external angle. I make the sum. I count the number of vertices of the triangulation. There is a little argument that you can just move away a bit all the triangles to verify that 3 times the number of faces is 2 times the number of edges. You plug all this in. You recover the Euler characteristic. And you recover the sum of the double integrals, and you obtain the Gauss-Bonnet theorem in general. And then, if you want to have some angles, this is also the same story. So I think I can finish now.
Thank you very much.
Yes, because this part I did not prepare enough. So.
Questions?
Are there any applications to general relativity that come from this research?
Of course, but I am not an expert of that because, of course, the curvature I decided to make a completely elementary talk, so this is just basic differential geometry. But of course, when you go to higher dimensional Riemannian spaces, so there are people who try to know whether the topology of the universe has some is non-trivial. But apparently, I know Jean-Pierre Luminaire, Marc Lachaise in France, who done that, looking at the observation in astronomy, but apparently they did not give something unexpected.
I have used this theorem in my of energy positivity or mass positivity in general relativity due to Hamiltonian constraint. You are able to translate the global energy, which is given by a surface integral, to a three-dimensional volume. Now, then, if you use a kind of 2+1 splitting, and then you divide the three-dimensional thing integral into two-dimensional integrals, and then you integrate over R. And these two-dimensional integrals may be computed just due to Gauss-Bonnet.
So it's what is called Hawking mass theorem or something like this. Right?
So let me just comment that very often Gauss-Bonnet argument is used to prove under various circumstances that the boundary of the black hole has to be a sphere. Basically, you express certain integrals over the boundary of the black hole as something positive, and it turns out to be also the integral of the curvature. The integral of the curvature then translates into the Euler characteristic, which has to be positive, so the boundary must be topological.
I understand.
So there is a couple of places in relativity where this type
You can have close like black holes.
yes, unless you violate certain positivity conditions.
So for higher dimensional cases, I'd like to say a few words because I did not prepare specifically for today, but I have worked a lot on that. So there were works by Heinz Hopf in the 30s who dealt with the following problem. I will be quick, in 1 or 2 minutes. So he has a hypersurface in Rn+1. So if we come back to what I said at the very beginning, which is extremely basic for a curve, when you remember I transpose the normal vector. This is a key idea which works in any dimension, by the way. So he has a hypersurface in Rn+1. So he computes how you transport an infinitesimal area to an auxiliary unit sphere in Rn+1. And then you discover the Pfaffian when the dimension of the manifold is even. And then Allendorfer and then André Weil, they tackle to do this for manifolds of any dimensions, any codimension. And they found this higher order curvature condition in terms of the natural formalism of Bianchi and Ricci and Levi-Civita. And later, Xing Chen came, and he just copied this formula, and he translated them in the language of Élie Cartan. And this formula became immediately invariant, because something I did not say here, which is rather deep, which is what around I'm walking, and like Pavel Mirovsky here, is that Cartan came after this differential geometry school, even after this Einstein, because after people put Einstein geometry in Cartan geometry, because Cartan himself did it in 1922. I remember. It was the first memoir of Cartan, was about general relativity, in fact, before these famous memoirs about Cartan connections. And then this quotient here, because remember, in one dimension it's just trivial, it's just easy, because this is like this quotient can be made completely invariant in the sense of Cartan. This is what Chern did. And then you have an analogous theorem that it's not 2 pi, I don't remember, a certain universal coefficient times the Euler characteristic is equal to the whole integral on any manifold with any topology.